A viewer recently asked me what I think about having children. This is a question that I can approach in a number of different ways. There are several parts to my answer, and each part of my answer is likely to be highly controversial. Anyone can look up the statistics related to millennials, marriage, and fertility rates. I'm not going to cite specific studies, but I've come across quite a few over the last several years, and it seems that as a trend, men and women are waiting until later in life to get married and start a family. More people are choosing to either put off having children until later in life, choosing to have fewer children, or choosing not to have children. I think there are a number of reasons for this, but I don't think it's purely a matter of choice. I also think it's important to notice that, on the whole, globally, the human population is still growing. So this trend is by no means universal. This is very important to point out, and I'll come back to it. Obviously, the influence of the feminist movement has pushed young women to focus on pursuing a career, over adopting a more traditional role as a wife and mother. They're pressuring intelligent and talented women to put off having children in order to pursue a degree and then a professional career, so that she can earn enough money to pay higher taxes in order to pay for all the illegitimate children of the welfare queens. Contraceptives and abortion also plays a role in this, obviously. Economics also plays a role. A large percentage of young people are living with their parents, because there just aren't enough jobs that are paying enough for them to move out and support themselves. In an economy where so many young people are struggling just to support themselves, it shouldn't be surprising that they're not choosing to have children they know they won't be able to support. Of course, on the lower end of the socioeconomic pyramid, you have welfare dependents, who are having children because they know the state is going to steal money from working people to support their children. The more kids they have, the more money they get from the government. So it ends up being the least educated, least intelligent, least hardworking, and least responsible members of society who are being subsidized by the state to reproduce at the expense of the most educated, most intelligent, most hardworking, and most responsible members of society. The people who should be having kids aren't. The people who shouldn't be having kids are. So do I think it's a good idea to have children? It depends on who you are. If you're a mature, responsible person who can support kids, have kids if that's what you want to do. Otherwise, having children is immoral. In the absence of a welfare state, I think it's immoral to have children if you're not going to be able to support them. And in a welfare state, I think it's immoral to have children that other people are going to be forced to pay for. For men, there are some additional things to consider in relation to the question of whether or not they should have kids. They need to be aware that the laws and the court systems are not on their side. This is pretty obvious, but if you're a man and you decide you want to be a father, that means finding a woman to be the mother of your child. And if you get married and stay together, that may not be a problem. But pretty close to half of marriages end in divorce, and the majority of divorces, somewhere around 70%, are initiated by the woman. The majority of custody battles are decided in the woman's favor. So the question for men is, does it make sense to have children with a woman who is very likely to leave you and take your children and your money away from you? Men really don't have either reproductive rights or paternal rights. I've talked about this in a little more depth in my video, Women Are Spiders. But to give a short answer to this question as it relates to men, I think it's extremely risky to get a woman pregnant. If you're a man, I don't think it's a good idea to have children or to get married until the laws are changed to give men equal reproductive and parental rights. I agree 100% with MRA and MGTOW guys on this issue. So for men, if you don't have enough money to support children, it's irresponsible to have kids. And if you do have enough money, it's a really huge risk given our current anti-male laws and court system. So in either case, I have to advise you against having children. I'm a little bit conflicted on this though. because I also share a concern with many others that white European people are in danger of becoming a minority in their own countries. Birth rates have gone down among white Europeans. More non-white immigrants have been coming into white European countries, and many of these non-white immigrants have much higher birth rates. I've talked about this in much more depth in my video, The War on Whites and Western Civilization. But the declining birth rates among white Europeans, combined with the massive immigration of non-whites into Western European nations, and the high birth rates among the non-whites, means that white people are in danger of becoming a minority in their own countries. So many people feel that this means that white Europeans should start having more kids. So what if you're a white man? Do you risk having kids for the sake of the survival of your race? Should you sacrifice yourself? Should you father children with a woman who is probably going to leave you and take your children away and take money from you through a court system that will force you to pay her child support and possibly alimony while denying you custody of your own children? Nationalists and conservatives won't like my answer any more than globalists and liberals will. But I say no. I think the solution to this problem is in adopting more sensible immigration laws and in securing our borders and deporting those who come into our countries illegally. If the birth rate goes down in Western European countries, I don't see that as a problem. If the population doesn't keep growing, or even if there's a little bit of a drop in the population of some of these countries, I don't see that as a problem. It's only a problem if another population is allowed to come in and replace the native population. I know some people have bought into the hysteria about overpopulation, while other people have bought into the paranoia about conspiracies aimed at population reduction. I buy into neither. But the person who asked me my views on having children was especially interested in my view as it relates to this kind of question, along with my view on how it relates to some of my views about esoteric spirituality and topics such as reincarnation, or the Gnostic goal of liberating the spirit from the material world. So I want to move in that direction. But I don't think it's possible to separate this question from the major issues I've raised. If you're convinced that overpopulation is a problem, I would encourage you to look at the countries with the highest birth rates and focus your efforts there. Here's a hint. It isn't Western European nations. As I've mentioned, Western European nations actually have a low birth rate and are facing the threat of demographic decline. So if overpopulation is a problem, what would be accomplished by persuading white people in Western European nations to have fewer children? So I don't see overpopulation as necessarily being a threat. And if it is, then I don't think that people in the developed world are contributing to it. So it shouldn't be seen as a reason for them why they should avoid having children. But I don't think that paranoia about population reduction or white genocide is an argument in favor of having children either. I think it's an argument in favor of securing our borders, returning to sensible immigration policies, and most importantly, dismantling the welfare state. I don't necessarily promote social Darwinism, but I think that cultural Marxism is actually far more sinister and dangerous. At least social Darwinism aims toward eugenics and the evolution of humanity. Cultural Marxism and the socialist welfare state promotes dysgenics by discouraging the most intelligent and productive individuals from reproducing, while essentially offering state subsidies to the least intelligent and productive individuals to breed like jackrabbits. I absolutely oppose any kind of forced sterilization programs or passing laws regulating who is allowed to have kids and how many they're allowed to have. But if we're going to build a massive welfare state, it's going to inevitably lead to either that or complete economic and social collapse. Liberty is a much better alternative. With liberty comes responsibility. And in a free society, without a massive state, my answer to the question of whether or not people should have kids or not would be simple. If you can't afford to support a child, you shouldn't have one. You should focus on improving your financial situation and career before you think about that. So what about from the perspective of esoteric philosophy? I saved that for last because it will be interesting only to a small number of people, but also because I think that in some ways it's the most interesting to me. Obviously, many figures within the esoteric tradition have advocated the renunciation of sex, marriage, and parenthood. Many have also married and had children. Pythagoras was initiated into all the major mystery schools of his day, and he chose marriage and fatherhood. So I think it would be difficult to argue that the mystery teachings are incompatible with marriage and parenthood. On the other hand, at least some Gnostic sects seem to have seen having sex, getting married, or having children as sinful. A few different explanations have been offered for this. Many Gnostics saw the material world as a prison in which spirits are imprisoned. Plato and other ancient philosophers expressed similar views. This is an idea that was very widespread. You find similar ideas in Hinduism and Buddhism. It ties into the concept of samsara, the wheel of suffering, or the cycle of death and reincarnation. Obviously, there is a wide range of views on these topics within both the Western traditions and in the Eastern traditions. To keep this simple, I'm going to focus on the big picture and some of the overarching themes, rather than get bogged down with the devil in the details. If you see this world as a kind of prison, or an illusion, or maybe even as a place of punishment and suffering, that you're trapped in and that you seek to escape or be liberated from, what are the implications of bringing a child into this world? And this seems to be a question that concerned the Cathars and many other sects that held some version of this worldview. As I pointed out, though, Pythagoras had children. He was initiated into all of the major mystery schools of his day, and I believe he achieved a very deep understanding of the mystery teachings of the various schools. I'm not trying to prove that these beliefs are true, I'm only considering the implications of these beliefs related to having children. I've already raised the question of whether, by having children, you're participating in the enslavement of souls in the material world. I would deny this. According to the esoteric view, the soul that will be born into this new body is reincarnating because it hasn't yet freed itself from the cycle of death and rebirth. It's being reborn into a new body because it must be reborn into a new body. By having sex with someone and having a child, you're not trapping a soul in the material world which was previously free. You're simply providing a new body for an already imprisoned soul to be reborn into. The imprisoned soul must be reborn in order to eventually become liberated. So I don't see any reason to view sex or childbirth as evil. In fact, hypothetically, suppose everyone living became celibate. Suppose no new human bodies were born. What would become of all those souls which haven't yet achieved liberation? If you believe in reincarnation, and if you believe that reincarnation is necessary in order for souls to evolve, or to attain enlightenment, or to become God, then sex is necessary. Biological reproduction is necessary. So there's nothing wrong with having children. But it doesn't mean that it's necessary for you personally to have children in order for the process to continue. Most people are going to give in to their biological urge to reproduce whether you do or not. So it isn't wrong if you do, but it's fine if you don't. You have a choice. I don't think I need to give you reasons to have kids. The biological drive is very effective at convincing you to reproduce without any prodding from me. But I will offer some things to consider. If you're a man, and you've chosen a spiritual path in life, or if you've chosen to focus on the path of knowledge rather than on materialistic pursuits, chances are that women will have little interest in you. Most women want a man who has money. They want a man who is higher than she is on the socioeconomic ladder. They want a man who has built a career and achieved some level of financial success. Even if a woman can technically support herself, as a rule, she still wants a man who can support her or give her a higher standard of living than she can give herself. You can accuse me of being sexist or of perpetuating gender stereotypes all you want, but this is the truth. As a man, the more focused you are on philosophy or esoteric knowledge, the less likely it is that you'll achieve the level of material success necessary to be appealing to women. And if you're a woman, your focus on the spiritual may have made you less focused on the physical. But at least for women, sexuality and spirituality are not in direct conflict. A woman who is a vegetarian and who practices yoga is very likely to have a very attractive body, whether she spends a lot of time on her hair and makeup or not. But a man who is devoted to knowledge and spiritual growth is much less likely to achieve material wealth. Men have a choice to make. So a woman can pursue the philosophic life without making herself less attractive to men necessarily. For a man, there is a fork in the road. So for men, the love of Sophia, the decision to pursue the path of illumination, entails at least a willingness to renounce sex, marriage, and a family. This is because it is a man's material and worldly success that makes him attractive to women. Philosophy pulls a man away from material pursuits. No man can serve two masters. As far as the sexual impulse, I've addressed that in The Meaning of Resistance. I think that Tantra, or various forms of sex magic, are worth looking into. But I believe that the primary benefit to be gained is the strengthening of the will. I believe a lot of what you'll come across in the literature is superstitious nonsense. It's not uncommon in the history of the occult that a certain amount of deception is used in order to entice materialistic people toward the path of illumination. But the desire to reproduce, and the desire to have sex or to have offspring, leads to the desire to be attractive to women. And the desire to be attractive to women leads men down the path of competing with other men in social dominance hierarchies. It leads them to seek the private accumulation of wealth. It ultimately leads to many of the problems that exist in the world. But as I've said elsewhere, women desire men who control resources, so men seek to gain control over resources. Women desire men who are wealthy and powerful, so men seek wealth and power. Eve bites into the apple first. The woman gives into the temptation of the material world, and Eve tempts Adam. The man falls for the woman, you might say. The man, like Orpheus, must return to the land of the living without turning around to see whether the woman is following him. She may not be. Orpheus turned around to check, and his wife dissolved and fell back to the underworld. So I speak especially to men here. Pursue your path. Give no thought to whether or not women approve. Give no thought to marriage or children. Renounce both. But renunciation of marriage doesn't necessarily mean that you'll never get married. The renunciation of family life doesn't necessarily mean that you can never have a family. But it's necessary to give it up first. The story of the Buddha is an interesting one. He abandoned his wife and child to set out on the spiritual quest. Taken as metaphor, this means that a man must give up the life of husband and father. He must turn his back on that in order to seek enlightenment with total commitment. But Buddha did return after becoming enlightened. He did raise his son. And surely an enlightened father is better than an unenlightened father. A Bible verse comes to mind. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Then all these things will be added unto you. Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son, but he wasn't ultimately required to make that sacrifice. His willingness was itself a sufficient sacrifice. Taken literally, this is a horrible and immoral story, and I've commented on it before. But symbolically, it's significant. Be willing to give up your children. I'm in no way condoning child sacrifice. I mean, be willing to sacrifice having children As with Abraham's test, the sacrifice may not be required, but it may. Be willing to accept that. You may renounce the world in order to know yourself, and then find that in knowing yourself you gain the world. Or maybe being rejected by the world is the price you'll pay. Can you accept that? As a man especially, but as a woman too, the pursuit of knowledge is easier without children. Everyone I know who has had kids says that once you have kids, your life changes. Your life revolves around your kids. And this can teach you self-sacrifice. It can teach you unconditional love. Parenthood can be a spiritual path. Every path leads to enlightenment in the end. I don't believe that any soul is ever lost. We all eventually return home. But some paths are more direct than others, and some have many more pitfalls than others. I think there are definitely advantages to not having children. I advocate not having children if you want to devote yourself fully to philosophy or the path of illumination. Even just in very ordinary terms, not having kids will mean having more time and energy to devote to things you find enjoyable and meaningful. Having kids is expensive. Not having kids will mean more financial freedom. All the money you would otherwise have to spend on kids, you can spend on travel or other things. Is that selfish? Having kids is selfish. Whether you have kids because you think having kids will make you happy, or whether you don't have kids because you think not having kids will make you happy, either way, you're doing what you think will make you happy. If someone says that they think that not having kids is selfish, they're only admitting that they think that a person who doesn't have kids will be happier. Otherwise, why would it be selfish to not have kids? If they thought that having kids makes a person happier, then wouldn't they expect a selfish person to want to have kids for the sake of their own happiness? So don't fall victim to this shaming tactic. But if you think that having kids will make you happier, have kids. But don't pretend to be less selfish than those that choose not to. Everyone does what they believe will make them happy. Even those who adopt an ascetic lifestyle do so because they believe it will lead to their release from the cycle of death and rebirth. They believe it will lead to the end of all suffering. This is also selfish. Whether it's selfish to have kids or not to have kids is a matter of perspective, and it's not a valid argument either way. So what about the question of whether or not it's moral to bring children into a world such as this? A world such as what? A world such as the one you've chosen to remain in? You haven't killed yourself, have you? By not killing yourself, you passively affirm that to live is better than not to live. Having been offered the choice to continue living or reject life by committing suicide, and having chosen to affirm life and continue living, isn't it hypocritical to deny another what you've chosen for yourself? Anyone who honestly believes that life on earth is so bad that it's immoral to bring another life into the world should immediately kill themselves. And I'm not encouraging anybody to kill themselves. I'm only pointing out that this is not a rational argument against having children. But unless you already have children, not having children is the default position. If you don't already have children, why should you have children unless there's a compelling argument in favor of having children? I haven't yet come across a truly compelling argument. If you have, I'm curious to know what it is. You're welcome to comment. But ultimately, I don't see this as a question that has one right answer for everyone. For some people, having children may be a perfectly rational and moral choice. For others, it may be totally immoral and irrational. And your attitude may change over time. As for myself, I don't have children, and have no plans to have children in the future, although I'm not absolutely opposed to the possibility. I have no real interest in persuading anyone else one way or the other. but I hope I've given you some things to consider. Peace.